February 10th, 2026, El Paso, Texas. In the night, the sky over Fort Bliss locks down fast. Zero notice restriction. Urgent enough that airspace discipline comes first and explanation comes later. Then the stories start arriving. Cartel drones, laser coordination, a party balloon, same patch of sky, 3 different public explanations. And while that contradiction sits in plain sight, another pattern is gathering pressure elsewhere. Scientists, defense-adjacent personnel, and technical people going missing, turning up dead, or slipping out of the public record under conditions that keep refusing to feel ordinary. That does not give me a conclusion. It gives me a board. And tonight, that board is telling me the same thing from more than one direction. The story is breaking faster than the explanation layer can hold it together. I'm Cassian Lohr. Welcome to the Lohr Files.
Midnight. Wrong silence.
Let's start where the pressure is highest. A widening cluster of missing and dead scientists, military researchers, and defense-adjacent technical personnel is now circulating hard through the UAP field. And no, I'm not waving that off. Too many real names are already in the air for that. Major General William Neil McCasland, Monica Reza, Carl Grillmair. A growing ring of names tied to aerospace, high-energy science, defense, technical research, and the state's deeper explanatory machinery. That alone is enough to open the file. Now let's get disciplined. The first mistake is to ask the weakest question. Are people really missing? Some of them plainly are. Some are dead. Some have disappeared under conditions serious enough to justify public concern. That is not where the work starts. The real questions are harder. What kind of people keep appearing in this cluster? What institutions keep recurring? What kinds of projects, facilities, and knowledge corridors sit in the overlap? Which names are firmly documented, and which have been narratively swept into the same current because public intuition senses a pattern before anyone has drawn the boundaries cleanly? That is the phenomenon. Not simply absence, patterned absence. Because when the same kinds of people keep collecting in the same anxiety field, military research leadership, NASA-adjacent science, Los Alamos-adjacent lanes, materials work, technical administration, high-security environments, the missing are no longer just personal tragedies in isolation. They become an epistemic event. What kind of knowing stands too close to the gap? That is the question. And yes, the count matters. 6, 8, 10, whatever the final stable number proves to be. But the count is not the deepest thing here. The deeper thing is the topology, the shape of the cluster, the recurrence of sensitive institutions, the way these names seem to gather around the hidden gears of national power. Aerospace, nuclear infrastructure, advanced materials, military research, technical interpretation. That does not prove one hidden hand. It does suggest that if this is coincidence, it is a very specific kind of coincidence. And it is not only the people themselves that raise the pressure. It is the instability around their institutional trace. In a cluster like this, you watch for more than bodies. You watch for edits, project associations softening, directory presence thinning, professional footprints becoming harder to hold in one place. The uneasy sense that what is vanishing is not just a person, but the clean continuity of their relation to the work around them. Sometimes that is ordinary administrative decay. Sometimes it is poor reporting. Sometimes it is panic stitching names together too quickly. And sometimes it is the first sign that a disappearance is rippling outward into the record itself. That is why this file matters. I am not saying every circulating name belongs in the same pattern. I am not saying the cause is singular. I am not saying the cluster is solved. I am saying it is already serious enough that dismissing it would be intellectually lazy. Because the danger in a story like this is not only panic. The danger is that real disappearances, real deaths, and real institutional links get blurred into useless sludge before anyone does the work of classification. So here is where I land tonight. The missing are not the question. The question is whether they form one coherent pattern, what kind of pattern it is, and who benefits when that pattern is treated as coincidence, gossip, or noise. That is why the file is open. Now let's move from cluster pressure to a case where official incoherence is already visible in public. Here's the anchor. The file on my desk tonight is CRR 2026-0004. Integrity Tier 2. Limited corroboration, but enough source stability to work the case properly. Across February 10th through 11th, 2026, an emergency zero-notice air restriction was issued over El Paso and Fort Bliss. Zero notice matters. That is not the gentle administrative hum of ordinary airspace housekeeping. That reads as response behavior. Something urgent enough that the sky gets disciplined first and the public story gets assembled later. Then the explanation stack comes in. The White House says Cartel drones. The Pentagon says laser testing coordination involving Fort Bliss and White Sands. CBS reports a party balloon was shot down. Same patch of sky. 3 different public explanations. That is the first thing worth saying. Not because contradiction automatically means a cover-up. Not because every inconsistency is revelation. But because contradiction at this level tells you the system is failing to speak in one voice about one event over one piece of sensitive ground. So let's break the case properly. Evidence 1, the emergency restriction itself. That is the documentary anchor. Something real enough happened to produce a formal lockdown. Evidence 2 through 4, the explanation stack. 3 source lanes, 3 distinct accounts. No coherent fit. Evidence 5, the contradiction. And contradiction is where weak minds either jump to fantasy or retreat to complacency. Both are mistakes. Sometimes contradiction is just bureaucratic slop. Different offices, different assumptions, different timings, poor coordination. Fine. But sometimes contradiction can function as a reading in its own right. Not of aliens, not of miracle craft, but of procedural instability. Of an explanatory system that is no longer narrating from one stable center. And that is what interests me here. Because what this case proves is not an anomalous craft. What it proves is that the public-facing explanation layer is fractured. Now the theories. Against OWS, only 2 speculative frames even stir meaningfully here, and even they stir lightly. ETI at the weakest threshold, disruptive event, fractured explanation, official incoherence. That is not enough. For ETI to advance, you would want impossible kinematics, multi-sensor documentation, material evidence, or equivalent anomaly with real teeth. We do not have that. UTR has the same problem. Borderland terrain, hidden operator models, liminal geographies. All interesting, none sufficient. Without trace evidence, recurrence pattern, or linked anomaly, it stays atmospheric. So the strongest active board remains conventional. Classified aerospace is the most plausible mundane frame because Fort Bliss and White Sands are operational test terrain. But if that is the answer, then the spread of public explanation still has to be accounted for. Misidentified mundane is where the balloon claim sits. Fine, balloons exist. Misidentifications happen. But that still does not explain why the surrounding narrative field becomes this noisy, which leaves the hottest live frame, narrative fragmentation. One incident. Multiple explanation streams. No clean reconciliation. That does not prove deception. It does not prove non-human craft. It proves something subtler and more useful. Official narrative coherence broke down in public over sensitive ground. And that is not the end of the case. That is the reason to keep it open. Now, field sense. The El Paso-Fort Bliss corridor is not empty symbolic terrain. It is border ground, military ground, sensitive ground, operational ground. So when a fast lockdown appears over that kind of place, and the story arrives in fragments, I take note. Maybe it was deliberate confusion. Maybe agencies were genuinely out of step. Maybe separate pieces of one response escaped through separate channels and never survived contact with one another. Any of those are still possible. But whichever reading you prefer, the public record remains unresolved. And when the record remains unresolved, the job is not to pick a theory you already like and drape it over the gap. The job is to keep shaving until the decorative nonsense comes off and the surviving principle stands there on its own. So what happens next? You go after the paper. FOIA the incident logs for February 10th through 11th. Not because FOIA is magical, it is not. But paper trails have a filthy habit of embarrassing people who assumed public memory would stay soft. Here is the falsifiable prediction. If these explanations can be reconciled, then somewhere in the incident record, there should be one coherent narrative spine. One event, one cause structure, one response ladder. If that coherence does not exist, then the contradiction is not merely orbiting the event. It becomes part of the event. That is the next data point. Until then, this case remains what it is. A real airspace response, a fractured explanation stack, and a very public failure of narrative alignment over sensitive ground. Enough to investigate, not enough to fantasize. Now we come home to territory. Because my work is not only skyward, UAP is the hard desk. But if you want to understand how a place imagines hidden power, you study the stories it buries beneath its own foundations. The digital aquilarian is sitting in Los Angeles. So tonight's territory note is the old legend of lizard people under downtown LA. And if your first instinct is to laugh, steady yourself. You're hearing the story too literally. This is not valuable because reptilian tunnel people make for camp. It is valuable because the legend tells you what Los Angeles suspects about power. Start with the mythic lens. A hidden civilization beneath the city. Buried wealth. Ancient intelligence below the civic skin, while the surface performs glamour, reinvention, sunlight, and spectacle. That is not random folklore. That is symbolic architecture for a civic fear, that the real machinery of power is always somewhere out of sight. And Los Angeles has done this before, taking a technical gesture toward hidden structure and allowing it to harden into legend. In 1934, G. Warren Shufelt, a mining engineer, claimed he had mapped a labyrinth beneath the city using what he called a radio X-ray device. Whether the method deserves trust is almost secondary to the cultural result. The city took an engineering claim about hidden structure and converted it into enduring myth. That transformation matters because it tells you something about the place. Los Angeles does not merely invent fantasies. It metabolizes infrastructure, speculation, engineering, secrecy, and image into one another until nobody can remember where the survey ended and the underworld began. Now the territorial layer. Downtown Los Angeles is genuinely stratified ground. Tunnels, service corridors, old civic seams, transit ghosts, utility infrastructure, buried logistics. The city really does have architecture beneath the performance, and urban legend loves architecture. Give people hidden corridors and a metropolis obsessed with surface image, and sooner or later, somebody decides the truth lives under the set. That is how myth roots itself in terrain. Eco-signature then. Concrete basin, heat shimmer, engineered river channels, fault line psychology, dry light on polished surfaces, A place that feels exposed and sealed at the same time. Los Angeles runs on hidden systems in plain sight. That is not folklore, it is infrastructure. So what is the cryptid signature? Not a woodland beast, not a roadside animal, not a thing with claws in a creek bed. This one is structural. The creature is a political imagination, subterranean intelligence under human streets, a buried class of operators beneath civic life. Direct evidence? None worth overstating. UAP overlap? Not evidentiary. Symbolic. But symbolic does not mean useless. Because once a city gets comfortable imagining hidden operators beneath it, it becomes easier to imagine hidden operators above it too. Undercity rulers and impossible craft are cousins in the same family of suspicion. Power without transparency, intelligence without consent, presence without accountability. That matters. Cryptid work, at its best, is not monster collecting. It is cultural cartography. It tells you what terrain does to the imagination of the people living on it, what they fear, what they project downward, what hidden order they think explains the visible disorder. Los Angeles does not dream of a simple monster. Los Angeles dreams of a buried administration. That tells you something. So if you move through this city properly, you log the old tunnels, the municipal underlayers, the forgotten passages, the civic ghost work, and the way hidden corridors become vessels for power myth. That is Atlas work, not camp, not fluff.
Cartography. So here's the board tonight.
Story of the week. A live cluster of missing and dead technical people, pressing hard enough on the field that it has to be classified, not dismissed. Investigation of the week. A real airspace lockdown over sensitive ground, followed by 3 incompatible public explanations and a paper trail that may yet force the record to choose a coherent shape. Territory of the week. Los Angeles, where the lizard people under the city legend tells you less about reptiles than about buried power, hidden systems, and a civic imagination that suspects the real operators are always out of sight. That is the pattern worth watching. A fractured sky, a cluster under pressure, a city built over its own concealed logic. I'm Cassian Lohr. Don't bring a conclusion to the night. Bring a notebook, bring charged batteries, and bring enough discipline to know the difference between lightning, fire, and ash.